to the cloud.
You already started recording.
All right. So it's on you, Indy.
All right. So we are group four. My name is Indy Crudup. My fellow group members are Melissa Heath, Selena Galloway, and Michael Hoyes. This is chapter one, classroom assessment for student success. The three learning targets for this chapter. Number one, know how classroom assessment fits into the big picture of your job as a teacher. Two, become familiar with the guiding principles for accuracy and effective use that underpin sound classroom assessment practice. Three, understand relationships among student motivation, success at learning, and assessment. A quick overview of the chapter is that in this chapter, we're really asked to rethink what classroom assessment is supposed to be about. Instead of seeing it as just test grades or something we do at the end of a lesson, assessment is framed as an ongoing tool that should actually support student learning. It's about being clear on what we want students to learn, designing assessments that truly match those goals, and then using the results to guide instruction and guide meaningful feedback. The chapter also emphasizes involving students in the process sorry, so they understand their own growth. When assessment is done with intention, it becomes less about compliance and more about helping students succeed. All right. I'm going to pass it on to my next group member.
So I am Melissa, and I had topic one, and the item for that was know how classroom assessments fit into the big picture of your job as a teacher. And to summarize that in a sense is essentially it's not as utilized as it should be because teachers commonly don't feel well enough prepared for the topics. And when you think about it, you tend to think of formal assessments such as the EOC and things like that. Um, but it's important for teachers to be assessment literate, meaning to be able to measure and report student achievement and use this knowledge to improve learning for students. And in order to do this, teachers need to gather their accurate evidence, um, then interpret assessment results to then integrate into their daily classroom learning. And the biggest thing is assessment should not just be to give a student a grade, but should be used to help students understand where they are standing as well as how you are doing with presenting the information. So that was topic one, and I will pass pa pass it on.
Thank you, Melissa. So, Michael, I'm going to go ahead and speak about the learning target two, which was to become familiar with the guiding principles for accuracy and effective use that underpin sound classroom practice. So, when this chapter talks about sound classroom assessment, it's really pushing us to rethink what quality means. And the authors argue that assessment is only as good as the decision it supports. So, the real question becomes, can we trust the information that we get from our assessments, and are we using it in ways that actually help students to learn? And then they speak about this in two technical ideas, and those were validity and reliability, where they're stating that validity is about whether an assessment represents what we intend to measure. And they utilize the analogy of a bathroom scale, where they says if you had weigh yourself at home, you get like 140 pounds. But with the doctor's office, you get 147 pounds. Somebody ain't giving you the right picture. Somebody lying to you. So they're not one of those two, or maybe both, is not reliable. And so, in the same way, classroom assessments are only really valid if they really accurately represent the level of student achievement on a predetermined set of learning targets. And so they stress that validity is always tied to purpose. An assessment might be perfectly fine for one use and completely inappropriate for another. So, example, like you might have multiple choice quiz might be valid for checking recall effects, but not for really diagnosing how well students can construct an argument or formulate a proof or whatnot, and from my mathematical context. So validity is not a fixed property of a test. It depends on what we're trying to do with that particular assessment. Now, reliability, on the other hand, is about consistency. An assessment is reliable if it produces stable results under similar conditions and circumstances. So scores change because of poorly written items, unclear directions, distractions, test anxiety, inconsistent grading, and then the results are distorted by factors other than learning. The authors want to really remind us that when this happens, we're no longer measuring achievement, but we're measuring all that white noise that takes place when students are testing, which is problematic. So they begin to speak about how we can address these things with the four keys to quality assessment, which were clear purpose, which was that we must know who's going to use the information and what decisions that are going to be used from the information. Is it formative or summative? Is it for students, teachers, parents, administrators who might be the individuals who are going to be utilizing that test, that assessment? The second one being these clear targets, which are stating that students and teachers really need precise learning goals, and we can't really assess things that we have not clearly defined. The third being sound design, which is that we must choose assessment methods that actually match the kind of learning you want to see. And methods are not really interchangeable. Some methods are more prone to attack a particular learning versus a different one. And again, we can see like recall as relates to multiple choice versus being able to see their thinking for open response type questions. And then our effective communication. Results must be shared in ways that help learners understand what they know, what they need to work on, and then what comes next. And so the authors really capture the heart of Learning Target when they write assessment's power to increase achievement relies on part of its ability to increase motivation through developing in students and understanding that learning is the goal of schooling. So Learning Target 2 is really about a mindset shift. Assessment is not neutral. The way we design it, the purposes we assign it, and the way we communicate results either support learning or undermine it. And the four keys that they gave to us gives us a framework for which making assessment part of instruction, rather than just a tool for sorting and ranking and grading. And I'm going to pass it on to my good colleague for Learning Target 3.
Thank you, Michael. So I have Learning Target 3, which was understand relationships among student motivation, success in learning, and assessment. Okay, so when we talk about the relationship between motivation, learning, success, and assessment, what really stood out for me in this chapter is that these three things are always connected. Assessment isn't just something that we measure, like my colleague said, in learning. It actually shapes how students feel about learning in the first place. I started thinking about my own students. The way we assess them, it sends a message. If every grade feels like a final judgment, students start to protect themselves. Some stop trying, some only care about looking smart, and others just do the bare minimum. The chapter described those different goal orientations. Students can become learning focused, ego focused, or work avoidant, depending on how the assessment is used. And this hit home for me. What I appreciate is the reminder that that feedback matters more than the number at the top of the page. When students get specific feedback, like here's what you did well and here's the next step to get better, they're more willing to try again. They start to believe effort actually leads to growth. And once that belief is there, motivation goes up, which leads to more success, which then builds even more motivation. It's a cycle. I've seen the opposite too. When assessment is all high stakes, students get anxious or shut down, especially for like my ML students, my multilingual students, and my students with IEPs. One bad grade can confirm every fear they already have about school. The chapter really pushed me to think about how the assessment will help students feel capable and not labeled. Another big takeaway was this is Another big takeaway was that assessment should prepare students for life and not just for the next test. When we involve students in getting in goal setting and reflection, they learn how to judge their own progress instead of waiting for a teacher to define them. That's kind of motivation lasts beyond the classroom. So for me, the relationship is pretty clear. How we assess is shapes the students' feelings, which affects how hard they try, which affects how much they actually learn. If we get assessments right, we don't judge, we don't just measure success, we help create it. And I think we're going to go into our reflection questions now.
So I had reflection question 1, which is most convincing or useful ideas from the chapter. And as an analytical thinker, my original degree is in quantitative marketing. I found that the student-centered assessment was extremely powerful because it allows them to identify their areas of improvement as well as small things such as exit tickets to help you as the teacher identify issues before getting too far along. And I feel like those are things that can help with the motivation of students with these assessments. And these two things stood out to me the most because they obviously help both the teacher and the student, but it allows for better elaboration and clarification to help reduce and boost the learning motivation that Selena talked about from the chapter. So those stood out to me the most. And I will pass it on to Michael there.
You kindly. So yeah, I have the alignment with beliefs, and I think one of the ways that the chapter really aligns with my beliefs is how it kind of implicitly centers the teacher as the ultimate decision maker and what school actually becomes for students. Um, like I've always believed that there's no educational reform, initiative, mandate, anything that really survives without teacher buy-in. All administrative, public, parental, district, state opinion all stops when the classroom door closes. I mean, even in my class, I would have a thing that said King Hoist on the wall. I mean, I run stuff. So it doesn't really matter what anybody thinks. Once I get in my room, it's whatever I got to do. And so if assessment is really going to change in a meaningful way, that change doesn't happen with policy documents. It happens when the teacher decides in their own classroom that they're going to do things differently. Um, and that idea really resonates with the chapter's claim that students are essential decision makers in the educational system. And if they decide not to try, no other decision maker's actions will cause learning. And so I extend this logic one step further in that teachers are the central decision makers in whether reform lives or dies. Assessment reform, in particular, cannot be coerced. It has to be understood, valued, and owned by teachers. And this connects with my work as a identity researcher, particularly mathematics identity, because the chapter makes it very clear that assessment is not neutral. It can either reinforce a student's sense of competence or quietly just erode it. And so when assessment is used primarily to rank, sort, and label, it teaches students who they are in relationship to the subject. And over time, that becomes their identity. Like things like, I'm not a math person or I'm bad at school, just become ingrained thought processes for them. But when assessment is used to clarify goals and provide feedback and support growth, it can help the students to see themselves as capable learners. And that aligns strongly with how I think about teaching mathematics. Assessment can either shut students out of the discipline or invite them into the community practice. And so this chapter has reframed something from my own classroom experience. Whereas, early in my teaching career, administrators used to push us to write objectives, learning goals on the board every day. And at the time, I was like, I'm not doing that. That's micromanagement. It really felt performative and just pointless. And so I just ignored it altogether. Now, I still told my students what I want them to know, but to be told to write that, I'm like, you got my face, I'm not doing that. So it was really hollow. And it was like, never really explained why it might have mattered. Um, and so what the chapter kind of helps to see is that the problem wasn't the practice of doing it. The problem was the lack of giving the meaning behind it. Um, and so being told write your objectives on the board without understanding how clear targets really shape student motivation, is like giving students work without explaining the purpose. It's the same thing. That's bad teaching the same way that's bad administrative work. And it produces compliance at best, and in my case, resistance, at worst. So the authors frame the gap in a very subtle but powerful way. They open the chapter by noticing that teachers regularly say, I wish we learned this in pre-service. And they document how classroom assessment has long been marginalized or treated as a technical psychometric topic, rather than an instructional tool. And they position this book as a product of decades of translating assessment theory and all this good stuff. But the implication is very clear that the knowledge has historically lived outside of teacher prep, and only reaches classrooms later through professional learning. And so that kind of framing resonates with me in such that, teachers are often handed directives without theory, without the research, without the rationale, and without the why, that so much so that reform just becomes noise. And so giving us like the why behind assessment is not really a luxury, it's a necessity. It is the only way that change becomes meaningful, owned, and sustainable in our classrooms. So ultimately, this chapter lies in my belief that assessment reform cannot be imposed. They must be understood. If teachers are to change how assessment functions in the classrooms, they need more than just mandates. We need clarity. We need purpose. We need trust in the ideas behind the practice. And really that just, you know, sets the stage for our next reflection from Selena, um, to really identify those ideas that actually feel useful and compelling for us teachers right now.
Great explanation, Michael. So my reflection was, which strategy or idea from this chapter would you feel most confident in implementing and why? And thinking about everything in this chapter, the strategy I feel most confident implementing is using assessment as ongoing feedback instead of just a final grade. The chapter emphasizes that assessment should help students understand where they are and what to do next, and not just label them with the number. So it's not necessarily as a grade, but more so as a feedback. When they know it's not a grade, they won't have so much anxiety behind it. I'm a and I didn't say this before, but I'm a big advocate of motivation in my classroom. I believe before any assignment or test can matter, students need to feel encouraged and safe. I give a lot of positive reinforcement. I am consistently reminding my students that they're capable, even when they don't see it in themselves. Many of my students come from tough home situations, so school has been a place where they feel supported, especially in my classroom. I work hard to build relationships first, so they know I'm on their team and not just there to judge their work, which begs the question for me, that I pose to even everybody after I finish. But do you think relationships are better than setting expectations first? And for me, I think they worked hand in hand, but relationships are more important to me, because if a student feels safe, then they tend to work better. And that's just in my opinion and my actual way of going about doing things and what I've seen results wise. I actually had a student who rarely came to school at first. He didn't believe in himself. He didn't see the point of trying. I kept motivating him, checking in with him, and showing him that I truly cared and believed he could do it. Over time, he started coming regularly, engaging in class, and by the end of the semester, he had me for 2 classes. He passed both my classes with A's, which meant even more, was that he started enjoying school and even did better in his other classes. The experience showed me how powerful encouragement and meaningful feedback can be, and again, forming those relationships. Now, I do still set boundaries with those, but I try to again make them feel safe. The chapter talked about how feedback is more powerful than grades, and I see that every day. A few encouraging words and clear next steps can do more than a percentage in a grade book. I know some students say I give a lot of work, and I do, but it's intentional. I break assignments down so anyone can understand them, even my OCS students. I also give multiple opportunities, so if student struggles with one assignment or just has an off day, or the whole grade just don't plummet. To me, that's part of motivating students, showing them that one moment doesn't define them. Now, don't get me wrong. Now you still have to do your work. I also feel confident involving students in self-assessments and goal setting, like we set goals together. The chapter called student involvement the what is it? Overarching principle of quality assessment. When students reflect on their progress, they start to believe they have control over their learning, and that belief fuels motivation. This strategy fits who I am as a teacher. I want assessments to be another way I encourage students, not another reason to give up. Especially for my multilingual students and my IEPs, assessment should show growth, possibility, not limits. And at the end of the day, the chapter reminded me that assessment is something that we do is something we do for students, not do for students, not to students. If my assessments help students feel seen, capable, and motivated, then I know I'm using them the right way. And so I'm going to pass it on to my colleague Indy to close us out on the last reflection question.
All right. So my part was the uncertainty or hesitation. Like Michael, I can say I was one of those teachers that I really didn't see the point of assessments because nobody ever gave me the meaning. So I was like him. Oh, you want me to write objectives on the board? I ain't about to do all that. But I'll tell the kids what I want them to learn. But getting back to the question, what part of the chapter feels hardest to enact and why does it feel risky or unclear? I would say the hardest part for me, at least, to enact would have to be the meaningful student involvement in the assessment process. I have to write down what I like to say. Sorry, y'all. While the idea is powerful in itself because it is helping to hold students more accountable when it comes to their learning, it can feel challenging to implement consistently in the real classroom setting. It can be challenging because it requires extra time, intentional planning, and much more. And when added to everything else we have to do as educators, it can be overwhelming as a whole. Why I feel that it's risky, I would say if your students are like mine, it can be hard to kind of entrust them to handle that part of their learning. I have a lot of students that were ego involved and task completion oriented. So their main focus was let me get my work done so she can give me my grade and she'll let me go on about my day. That's something that I have to nip in the butt myself, but that would be why it would be risky for me to just entrust them with that much power in their assessments. Now feel free if y'all have anything that you felt that was going to be hard to enact or risky or anything like that.
Well, I did want to pose that question because we go back and forth at my school about building relationships versus setting standards and expectations. Like they feel like that's more important, and I'm just not that person. Like I'm with you guys. I'm not doing them. I'm not doing that. My kids don't learn like that. I'm not doing that. I'm gonna do what works for us. So I'm big on building relationships, and that's why I have the results that I do have based on that.
And
I
I'm like
understand
you.
that. Okay.
I was always big on relationships and then get the rest because it's like once you build that relationship with the child, you can pretty much get them to do anything you want to do.
Yeah, and then I don't have those discipline problems either. Like
Yeah,
they
and
don't
I don't either. Like I rarely have to call admin
and they
because
even
either
call me, Miss Galloway, can you come get
exactly
I'm like I'm the mama of the school. Like, why
they
you
will
trying
send
to
them.
be
They
my
will send them
disrespect?
to
Yes.
me.
Are you disrespecting Mr. Fernandez? Why are we doing that? Yeah, so
Yeah,
I
I'm
was
with you on that. Yeah, rapport is the biggest thing, and I always tell everybody that's like, kids will go to war for you if they like you, and so it don't really matter
Mm-hmm.
about anything else. I mean, I'll have kids will have a B in my class, a F in everywhere else class because they like me, and so they'll
Like
do
me.
work. They'll do work because it's me. It's not about the content. I'm not gonna say everybody loves mathematics. That'd be a bold-faced lie. But I mean, at the very least, they will try and put forth effort. Not because it's always, it's rapport and growth. That's all I really cared about with my kids. Rapport, like I need to have a relationship with them. And I need to be better every single day. Be better than you were yesterday. That's the common mantra. Be better than yesterday. That's all I want you to do. Be better than yesterday. As long as you can keep like doing that, and we have a pleasant environment. And I'm a silly teacher myself. I mean, I'll get serious when I have to be, but I'm real silly, and I'll just dance around the room and do all kinds of random nonsense. It's a whole little edutainment type situation, but it's all about the rapport and letting them know that, I care about them as an individual, not just them as a mathematics student, as a student in my classroom. And it's bigger. It's bigger than that. They're people. They're whole people. Um, I had mentioned, and Melissa, you can kind of speak to that as well. That when I speak about what I do, I teach people math. I don't. It's not. I don't teach math. I teach people math, and people is important. That people comes before the content, because that is who that is who I'm dealing with. I'm not dealing with content, I'm dealing with people. Um, and so I do like, how this gets back to the idea about motivation, and not just assessing and whatnot, but actually motivating students to become cognizant of these things, and how we're trying to spend that time with them and so they can grow as individuals and grow as learners. Um,
Uh, I feel like I have a little bit of an advantage on the student relationships, because initially it's odd to walk into a room and my speech impairment, I also insert random words at times. And the beginning of last year, I introduced myself as Miss Peanut Butter instead of my actual name. Um, and I feel like that helps students to understand that, like, everybody makes mistakes and it doesn't define you. And if I can do it, if I can stand in front of all 25 of them and get through it, then they can complete the project in a sense. So I feel like I have a little bit of an advantage there. And I definitely do attract more of the special needs students, and that's fine with me. Except for the English language learners. I feel bad for them trying to understand me.
Well, Melissa, let me just tell you, you just doing this job, it's motivation. Like just being in this group with you and with your speech and impairment and still teaching and still having so much confidence. Let me just tell you, it's motivation for me. So I shouldn't have anything to worry about, because if you can do it, then I shouldn't have to worry about, like this year teaching computer science that I knew nothing about. Well, I was so insecure about it. But just being in here with you, that's motivation for me to keep going. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to conclude this first by reinstating the chapter main message. So, big idea of the chapter is assessment is not just about grading; it's a tool for improving teaching and learning. Effective classroom assessment helps teachers understand what students know, guides instructional decisions, and actively involves students in their own learning. Y'all feel we need to go over the learning targets one more time, or are we good?
Hey, if you want to say them, I think we kind of good.
I mean, we got 30 minutes. We can stop.
Let me just say, I think we actually did good for the first podcast. I was a little bit, leery
Yeah,
about it,
I
but
was
I
a
think I
little.
might like this, y'all. I think I might like this.
Yeah, I feel like when I'm more prepared,
Yeah,
I got y'all.
I think it's just because it was something different for us.
Yeah.
But I gained a lot of it from everybody's perspective. So I will each day each do better than before. I like that, Michael. That's actually going to be my quote this week. I'm going to put it on my board. So I'm going to use that. Yeah.
For those that know, some of that came from Naruto, but I want to add another. Let me go ahead and stop the recording, and then we can kind of debrief a little bit.
Okay.